In this lesson, we are going to look at calculations with decimal fractions, majorly operations with decimal fractions. How do we add decimal fractions? How do we subtract decimal fractions? And then later, maybe in 1 or 2 videos to come, we will also look at multiplication of decimal fractions and then division of decimal fractions. Now, there are a few rules that we will want to follow when we are adding decimal fractions. That is when we are dealing with this calculation part, which is about adding decimal fractions. Well, this rule applies even when you are subtracting. The rule for adding decimal fraction also applies when we are subtracting decimal fractions. And what are these rules? Well, there are majorly 3 rules. The first thing is to write down the numbers one under the other with the decimal point lined up. So what we are having is, if we are given fractions like 3.21 to be added to 4.5, we have to rearrange this and write it in such a way that this decimal point is exactly below the first decimal point up. This 4, which is under 1s, will fall here under 3. This 5, which is under a 10th, will fall under this 2, so that we have this. So this is the alignment that we need to do before anything can be done. And we say you line up the decimal points, okay? That is step 1, lining up the decimal points. Then when we are done with the lining up the decimal point, so that the decimal point of the second fraction falls exactly under the decimal point of the first fraction. The next thing we want to look at is to put in 0 so that numbers have the same length, okay? So yes, sometimes it's important that, like here, we could put 0 so that numbers have got the same length. Notice that we have 3 numbers here, and here we have only 2 numbers. So to have the same length, it would be necessary, or at least a good thing for us, to put what? To put a 0 here. Now notice that this 0 that you're going to put will not change too much. It is only to have the same length. It will not change the meaning. It will not change the result that will come. So yes, you may not put it, but if you put it, it's a good practice. Then now one last thing is then add, that is using the column addition, remembering to put the decimal point also in the answer. The next thing we now want to do is we want to add the column way, the vertical way, in such a way that we have everything in order. After the alignment, we should not forget the what? The decimal point. So we have to drag, that is, and just drag that decimal point straight down. That is what we do. We drag the decimal point straight down. And when we do that, we can now carry on with the addition. So this was supposed to be having a 0, and when we add 1 to 0, we get 1. When we add 2 to 5, we get 7. We drag down the decimal point. Then when we add 3 to 4, we get 7. That is how we add. Now, sometimes fractions are already given for you in what? In this format here with the vertical column. If that's the case, then it's just easy for you to carry on with what? The remaining bit of addition. For example, when we look at this activity on worksheet, that is worksheet on addition of decimal fractions, what we see is, well, let's go ahead and we solve it. So we are working on addition of what? Decimal fractions. see what comes out. Okay. So we take the first number. So the first number, I'm going to call it activity 1 part A. So in this activity, what we are supposed to do is we are supposed to add 5,62 to what? Well, 3,31. Now notice that because of the program I am using, I'm going to be using this horizontal, not the vertical addition, but the step will still be giving us the same answer. Now notice when we add a 2 to a 1, we get a 3. Okay, then now when we add a 6 to a 3, we get a 9. Then what we do is we drag down the decimal point right there. Then now we add 5 to 3 so that we get 8. Yes, just that. That is how we add when the fractions are already arranged for us. Okay, so in the next question, that is activity 1, part B, we are supposed to add, what are we adding? We're adding 21.08. Okay, 21.08. We're adding it to, we're adding this to 13.72. So we have 13.72. Yes, that's what we have. What are we supposed to get? Well, even if I'm writing it the vertical way, but we can still add the horizontal here. So we add these two. When we add 8 to 2, that will be 10. We write 0, we carry 1. So the 1 is put right here. So we now add 1 to 0, we get 1. 1 plus 7, we get 8. Yes. So in the next step, we now drag down here the decimal point like that. Then beyond the decimal point, we now add this 1 to this 3. And what do we get? We get a 4. Then now when we add this 2 to this 1, what do we get? We get a 3. So what do we get in total? Well, in total it will be 34.80. The next question is part 3, this first activity. And so in this case, we are supposed to add 134.24. Adding it to 21.07. So we are adding this to 21.07. Question is, how do we add these two? Well, the thing we know is since they're already properly arranged, when we add 4 to 7, we get 11. We write 1, we carry the 1 up here. So this one that we have carried up, we add to 2, we get 3. Then 3 plus 0 remains 3. Now the next thing is to drag this decimal point down there. So after that, we are now have to add 4 to 1. Now notice that when we add 4 to 1, we get 5. Then in the next step, we want to add 3 to 2. Well, when we add 3 to 2, we also get 5. And now we have to add 1 to 0 here. And so when we add 1 to nothing, we stay with 1. So yes, the answer to this question will be 155.31. Now in the next question, this activity 1 part D, what we are required to do is to add 12.96. Okay, 12.96 onto what? 4.50. 0. Now, when we do that, then look at the way it is arranged. So we add 6 to 0, we repeat 6. Now, when we add 9 to 5, we get 14. And so we write 4, we carry 1. Before we write this one, we need to drag the decimal point down. So the one that we have will appear on top of 2. So now we want to add 1 to 2 so that we get 3. And 3 added to 4 is what? Is 7. Then now we have to add this 1 to 0. And is what? Is 1. So yes, stay as 1 right there. Oh, the 1 will stay right here. Yes. Now, the next thing that we want to do is to find the solution for what? For activity 1, question 5. So this is going to be called E. Here, we are adding 6.218. And this value is being added to 83.072. That is 83.072. So how do we add? Well, it's already arranged. So we add 8 to 2. When we add 8 to 2, we get a 10. So we write 0 and carry forward 1. So this will be 2 when we add 1 to it. So now we have 2 and 2 is added to 7. So that we get what? We get 9. Then now we have here 2 that we have to 0. Add to 0. And when we add 2 to 0, we get a 2. Then in the next step, we drag down the decimal point right there. Then after dragging down the decimal point, we now add 6 to what? To 3, so that we get a 9. Then after that, we have this 8, which is going to be added to nothing. So it will stay as well as 8. Now, in the next step, we are going to be adding, that is in question 6, activity 1, part 6. So in activity 1, part 6, we're adding 205.9 rather 392. This is being added to 713. 713.227. Yes, 0.227. So how do we add that? Well, we come here and add 2 to 7 so that we get 9. Then we add 2, 9 to 2. That will be 11. We write 1, we carry 1 right on top of 3 here. So when we add this 1 to 3, we get 4. And 4 added to 2, we get 6. Now what do? We drag down the decimal point. After that, the next thing we want to do is to add these numbers beyond. So when we add 5 to 8, rather 5 to 3, we get 8. When we add 0 to 1, we get 1. And when we add 2 to 7, what we get is a 9. That is how we do the adding. Now after that, thing we want to look at is one part 7. Yes, part 7. In activity 1, part 7, we are going to be adding, well, what are we adding? We are adding 86.512. That is 86.512. To 22.0. Yes, that is what we have. So how do you add this? Well, we add this 2 to this 2, and we get what? We get a 4. And when we add a 1 to a 5, what we get is a 6. The next thing is to add 5 to nothing. 6 is not supposed to be there, it's supposed to be this side. The 6 is supposed to be here. Then now, when we add a 5 to 0, we get a 5. Then in the next step, we drag the decimal point. Then when we add 6 to 2, we get 8. And if we add 8 to 2, we get 10. Yes, that is what we get in adding those two. Then now, the next thing is to calculate or to add the last question in activity 1. So in activity 1, the last question is question 8. Suppose that 190, okay. So we will be having 190.25. Now this one must be added to what? This one must be added to 11.05. So the question is, how do we get now the final answer? Well, let's see how we can go into a will add this. So when we add this 5 to 5, it will be 10. So you write 0 and carry forward 1. The one that you have carried forward will be written on top of 2 here, and we will add it later to 2. And when we do that, we get a 3. Then now when we add, rather before that, we dragged what? We have dragged down the decimal point. Then now when we add 0 to 1, well, what we get is a 1. And when we add 9 to 1, what we get is a 10. So you write 0, you carry 1. This one is added onto 1 to give us a value of 2. So yes, this is how calculation is carried out. In what? In dealing with addition of decimal fractions. Now the next thing we want to look at apart from addition is called subtraction. So the next thing is called subtraction. We want to see what happens when we are subtracting decimal fractions. So let's get right away to the question or to the activity, or maybe a small introduction. Yes, here we go. Now when we are subtracting two numbers, the rule is a lot similar. We have to rearrange the numbers so that the ones fall under ones, the tens fall under tens, and also the a tenth fall under a tenth. Then 100 falls under 100. We have to do that. So as it is indicated here, we stick a 0 in there so that you can do what? Do the borrowing, regrouping. So now for this, we have 3.8 minus 1.26. Now notice that just to have the same length, we have added here is 0. So that it will also be 3 numbers like what? Like the second fraction in decimal point. So how do you subtract then? When we take away 6 from 0, how is that possible? Well, we have to borrow 1 from 8 onto 0. So when we borrow a 1, it will be coming as a 10, not as a 1. So this is 10 now minus 6 to give us a value of 4. You see? So that will be 4. Now notice that here we already borrowed 1, so we have 7. The 7, when you take away from it 2, you get 5. And now you have 1 minus 2. You drag the decimal point down, and so 3 minus 1 should give us a value of 2. Yes, that is how subtraction is done. The rule is majorly the same. For example, when we look at this first question, the first question, we have what? 7.92 minus 4.42. How do we subtract? Well, 2 minus 2 is 0. 9 minus 4 is 5. 7 minus 4 is 3. Just that. Just remember to drag the decimal point. The rest of the calculation or of subtraction remains the same. The other thing is when we have 69.09 minus 29.0502. How do we have that? Well, 9 minus 2 is 7. This is 0. Then 7 minus 5 is a 2. And 6 minus a 2 is a 4. The calculation carries on like that, like that, like that. And so I would like you in an activity to try these questions, these ones here. From question 3, activity 2, up to question 8. And when you are done, you just submit the work right away. That is for adding and subtraction of fractions.